This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And my special guest today is Joanne Williams. And when we talk about avoiding the maze, it's the maze of life. It's all the things that we go through on a daily basis. And before we got started today, I mentioned to Joanne that I don't have a pet. I had pets when I was growing up. I'm very familiar with service dogs because I did some work with Autism Speaks, and I understand how important a service dog can be for somebody on the spectrum, as well as other individuals as well. So, as I mentioned, Joanne, I either keep my husband of almost 40 years or I get a pet. And so I think I'm going to keep him and I'll pat him on the head when he gets home from work today.
And he'll like that.
Yes, I think he will. So when I was going through Podmatch, and anybody who's out there listening, Podmatch is a great organization where podcasters like myself and Joanne can find guests for our shows. And on Avoid the Maze, we talk about, like I said, things that happen all around us that maybe we aren't aware of. So as I read your bio, it was like, you know what? This is something that I think can really help others. So tell us a little bit about who you are, and if your puppy dog there decides to bark,
He might.
that would be just fine.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for having me, Karen.
Sure.
Yeah, I am a 30-year mental health professional. And so I've been around the maze a lot in my own life. And I think that's what really propelled me into mental health. I wanted solutions. I wanted strategy. How the heck do you navigate this world that I was not prepared for? Nothing in my life prepared me for the skills, the understanding, whether mostly emotional skills,
Sure.
that I felt like I was just searching for. And that's how I got into and have continued lovingly and as a mental health professional. And then about so mostly I would counsel people for anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are kind of my specialties. Then about 8 years ago, I was on a plane, and when you could have emotional support animals on the plane with you, and it was I didn't have one at the point, but my dog was like thrashing around a little bag under the seat, and I'd take him out and try to calm him down. And he was making me get anxious. And the flight attendant told me about this program. She goes, "You probably should know about this program for emotional support animals, that if you have a letter from a mental health professional stating that this would help you to fly, you could bring your animal, have him on your lap the entire time." It's like,
Oh, wow.
done deal.
Yeah.
So, and then as a mental health professional at that point, 20 something years, I'm like, how could I not know about this? So I researched myself, and I saw at that point, there's actually two laws. There's a federal law, the Fair Housing Act, that you could have your animal in housing with you for people that, again, have a diagnosis that's been diagnosed and you get a letter, or for flying. So I'm like, well, I'm a mental health professional. Why don't I start doing these?
Right.
So I started doing these myself after understanding what was required in the law. And I have now for 8 years. And then last year, January 2020, and it's beyond me why they would change this now, that they stopped allowing emotional support animals to go on the plane with people. And they do need now to be a psychiatric service dog. So when there was grumblings about that a couple of years ago, I started researching that. What does that entail? And basically what it is that you do have to have a diagnosis that's recorded, and your animal has to help you with your symptoms. So like, say if you have anxiety attacks or anxiety or depression, there has to be a direct link between your diagnosis and how your dog may come over to you when you start getting anxious and calm you down. There's a couple more too, but basically that is it. So now I also certify for people to have a psychiatric service dog so they can take them with them to fly. And now there's really 3 laws: the Americans with Disabilities Act, that they can take them in public, everywhere that a medical service dog could go, and fly and be in housing. So that's become my specialty.
Well, don't you think that maybe the reason they stopped letting emotional support animals travel was that some people had taken it to the next level? People were bringing on snakes. There was an airline, I believe in like January 2020, where somebody brought a duck on with them. And now it's like, this animal really needs to be certified as an animal that really does support you and is trained properly, correct?
Well, you drank the Kool-Aid.
Okay.
The media has done a very good job, and I think with the airlines, to make those stories up.
Got it. Okay.
There's been a law for 36 years that you have to have this certified by a mental health professional, and that they have to help you with the daily functioning. And in the law, it's very clear: no snakes, no exotic animals can ever go on a plane. And it really is the airline's responsibility. When you check in, they make us go through the line, give them all the paperwork. They're supposed to check right then and there that this dog is safe, is minding and behaving. So I believe it was more on the airlines not wanting to have animals on the plane. They mostly didn't even follow the law, nor ask for the letter, or even do the things that were in the law, and then turned it around, I see, very nicely to say, those people, those animals, those this. And I of course, there may have been some, but the peacock never got on the plane. I think, and if you look at the turkey picture, that was so cute, there's nobody else on the plane.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking there was a little bit of manipulation there. And I got to tell you my theory. You notice how the violence has gone up on the airlines in the last year, like 500% or something, some crazy amount. And I'm kind of wondering if one of the reasons may be that we can't take our animals, because animals have been proven to calm the entire environment they're in.
Absolutely.
Just wondering.
Yep. Well, and I'm glad I brought it up that way, because like many of us that don't have an animal, okay, and we see these things going on at the news, and you know, I know we all like to exaggerate because it just like it adds
it's a better story,
right? Exactly. But I will tell you one of the things that I do know about emotional support animals. 5 years ago, my mother had a stroke, and my niece had a dog who my mother just adored. And she brought the dog over to my mom, and my mom was blind at the time. But my mom sensed that dog when it walked in the door. She could smell it, you know, and she kept saying, you know, where's my baby? And even though this dog was not trained as an emotional support animal, this dog knew there was a difference between the last time he had seen my mom and that day. And he just got into bed with her and snuggled with her. And she was just this delightful little lady because she had this animal there. And so
there it is.
That's when I went to hospice, and I said, okay, I want an emotional support animal to come visit her on a regular basis. And it was the best thing that we did, because she was communicating better with the dogs than she was with us. And so we were getting those snippets back from her that we probably wouldn't have gotten before. So as a mental health professional, we know that 30 years ago, you didn't look at mental health the same way as you do today. In fact, 30 years ago, none of us wanted to admit if we were on antidepressants, because people would have assumed the worst. What has really changed? Why? And I'm so glad that it is changing, but How has it changed?
Very good question. From my experience, what you're talking about is we call stigma, that we don't want to talk. There's some shame involved. If I say I have depression or anxiety, I'm looked at as crazy. Or if I go to a counselor, I'm looked at as crazy. I see that in some ways it's gotten worse because since COVID, more people, and some of the data is showing actually 50% of the population now has depression or anxiety. And there's still a shame stigma about it. And the good news about it is people are so desperate. Unfortunately, I don't mean to laugh, but they've become so desperate they must do something.
Right.
And now mental health professionals, you can't get in to see them.
Right.
So there's kind of a mixed bag of this. I think there's more awareness of possibilities of help. I'm not sure the stigma has changed much at all. I think more people are reaching out but can't get services. And with this as a medium of seeing each other through a computer, it's actually increased people's ability to go outside their little town that may be in, Ishmagush,
right,
to be able to see somebody through a computer. So I think there's a lot has changed. But at the same time, I think they've almost negated each other out. So I think we're almost still at neutral about the stigma. And the one good thing, another good thing is with COVID, what I'm seeing is most people are going within. I think they're really looking inward now for what do I need to do? What responsibility do I have to take? This dang thing isn't going away.
Right.
What am I going to do with this anxiety or this depression? And I'm just seeing more what I call technically emotional stuff coming out from prior traumas or emotional things that never really got dealt with. And I think that's why people are looking within and searching and doing some of their own work. So I think a lot has come out of COVID, pushing people to the brink, which
right.
is not so good. But I think they're searching, and I think they're seeing, oh, maybe that counseling isn't such a bad idea. Relationships have really been tough on
right.
a lot of people that have been locked in together. So there again, I think people are seeing, do I really want to stay with this person for another year? Maybe I really do need to make a move. So I think that there's a real mixed bag there. So I'm not sure that I really clearly answered your question, but there's a lot of stuff going on.
Well, I shared on a previous podcast that I grew up in an era where my mother always said, you don't hang out your dirty laundry for your neighbors to see.
Yes.
And my mother always said that she never was depressed. And it was like, how can that be? There are little things that can really hurt you and bring you down. And maybe she just didn't want to classify it. But right. I had ups and downs my whole life. And my mother, God love her, it was always, just forget it. There's the sun shining, or the sun will shine tomorrow, or go look at your pretty hair. There was always something that she thought could correct nice, it. And about 10 years ago, I went through a very deep depression. And she lived out of state. So I went up to visit her and I sat her down and I said, I have to tell you something. And I explained to her, I didn't know what brought me to this brink, but here I was, that I lost my job over it. I was on medication. I was determined to get better, but I can't get better until I deal with it. And again, I was one of those. I wanted to dig in from inside and get it out. I didn't want to come see someone like you until I was like, okay, now I have something and let's work on it. And my mother looked at me and she said, my children don't get depressed.
My children.
And I looked at her, and my older brother was there, and he said, who are you kidding? I've been depressed most of my life. And so we had this almost funny dialogue going on. And I think she started to see that, maybe she had felt this way on and off during her life, but she was always told to grin and bear it.
Yeah.
When I started podcasting right about that time, I used to say to people, just be honest with yourself. If you're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. And if you're having a good day, you're having a good day. And you can go from bad to good in seconds.
And how do you do that? And that's kind of what my podcast, Anxiety Simplified, is about, because you're right. And I think this labeling of depression, I don't think it helps us understand the symptoms. What is actually doing? It's not sadness. That's not depression. And I think sometimes we say that, but there is actually 9 symptoms to it, but it has to really be affecting your social or your relationships or your job in some way, that you're not motivated, you can't sleep, you're not eating right, or you eat too much. And that is that low feeling that you do have, that we do call depressed, or I call it overwhelmed. And also it's just like you can't get out of your own way. It just feels like you're digging down and you can't get up, you're just you can't see the top yet. And I think that's why the label, I think, is make it hard for people. But I really do like to speak to what happened in that change that happened for you, because there were steps, and you may not have noticed what you did, but I want you to. What were those steps? Because what I heard just from what you said, Karen, was I decided. First thing, I decided I'm going to do something. And then what I heard was I'm changing around some of my thoughts from what I was thinking, that maybe I can't, I won't, I don't know how, whatever that was, to, what, maybe I can, maybe there's some light here, maybe there's some hope. And then there's like, oh yeah, I had some good days. I had more good days than bad. I am feeling successful. I'm doing things I love, doing a podcast. There was steps in that. Do you kind of hear what I'm saying there?
Well, and the interesting part was I saw that right from the beginning, which, so let me backtrack. I was in corporate America. I loved my job. I was offered a promotion. I went for the promotion and I got it, but I didn't get it. So when I say that, they didn't give me the title. They gave me a little bit of the money. And it was like, that's when I started feeling like, where am I? And I really can't do the job like I was yesterday, because I've been given this sort of promotion, and yet you're not giving me the tools to move forward. And again, I thought I could just handle it. And the more I tried to handle it, the angrier I got. And I came home one day and told my husband I didn't like him. And he looked at me like, okay, that's fine. But do you love me? And the answer was, yes, I do, but I don't like you, because I didn't like me.
Yeah, good for
and
you.
As soon as when I said it out loud, I said, I got to do something about this. And he said, what can I do for you? And I said, nothing. And that worked for me. I know it's not going to work for everybody else. Okay. And that's why I love when people like yourself are out there guiding us and saying, look, there's a reason you got down, but there's also a good reason why you can get back up. And we just have to know that it may not happen overnight.
Right. It is a process. How you got into it was a process,
right?
And how you get out of it is a process, but there are steps. And I think people sometimes think it's just like all of a sudden the sun's going to come out and everything's going to be fine. It's like, poof, it's magic or something. I think they think that about counseling. And I think they get discouraged too, that like, I'm going to be doing something to them to make them change. And I'm like, no, that's your job, but I'll guide you. I will coach you. I will give you steps, and you have to practice and see what works. And then you come back and we talk some more about it. And I think, to me, that's what I have found helps clients probably the most, is making it look like a pathway, or making it look like steps that, okay, do this one and see how you feel. If this one makes you feel better, you want to continue it. And then you can add another step. And it just feels like it kind of chunks things down into measurable, easier steps. And oh my gosh, looking at this big picture, and how do I, and I don't know, and I get discouraged and overwhelmed, so that's what I feel like my counseling practice or about is, or I even just put out a course, my first course about conquering anxiety attacks, or conquering what I call fear attacks, really, in a step-by-step way. And that there's even a free download that they can get at anxietysimplified.net that has it outlined. And then there's a workbook if they would like to purchase it in the course. But even in the download, you can really follow the steps and see that there's a progression that goes into the panic or anxiety attack. It didn't just happen. And that's what I hear every single day. It just came out of the blue. I don't know what happened. So that's what I teach as steps.
Well, and what I'm hearing, what you're saying, is that we can take the learning from you, the guidance from you, we can use it in so many different places in our life. You want to go on a diet, don't throw all the food out day one, and just be eating celery sticks, because it's not going to work. So I know when my husband was diagnosed diabetic, I wanted to support him through it. I didn't throw all the sugar away, but I started using alternatives. But I did it in baby steps, because I didn't know if I was going to like it. I didn't know if our son was going to like it. And I certainly didn't know. My husband loves his sugar. So, it was like, we're going to do it very small. And it helped because, number one, he now has even from day one, his diabetes has been totally under control. And my sugar levels and our son's sugar levels are in good shape. And so we didn't feel like we were deprived. And they really didn't have to do anything, because I did it, since I'm the one who shops and cooks. But again, that was baby steps, because occasionally I find if I make something for dinner and it spikes his sugar, it's like, you know what? That's not the right thing. We're going to have to change it. So when people seek you out, are they really at their brink, or are people smart enough just to realize earlier before they're about to be shattered?
Not really. It's usually most people are on the brink. They just do not know what else to do, because they've tried everything else they can do. And so that progression kind of has continued. There's a few that, of course, just want to get deeper into themselves and understand. But most, no, it's pretty desperate times and feel like, I just don't know what to do. But, think to set a secret. I would like to make a comment about, for everybody to really hear what you said about how to change the diet, because to me, I think addictions or habits are very misunderstood, and thinking, oh, I just have to quit everything, just stop it, and then it'll all work out somehow. And what science has really shown is that to stop any habit, you need to replace it with a new one. It's not just stopping that one. And like smoking, for instance, is a known habit, but you can't just stop that. Really, the hand to mouth is part of the habit as well. And that's why people eat. But if you can replace that with a better habit, maybe it is the celery or the gum or the carrot, but you are still doing something until you can continue that progression with a better habit. And I see anxiety attacks in the same way as a habit, a worry habit that we've continued, and you must replace it with a reassuring thought and habit or some other better, healthier skill. And that's what I heard you did with the sugar. It's very similar. You've got to replace it with something a little better that's tolerable, that you enjoy. You can't just go yuck and think, oh, I'm just going to power my way through it. It just never works.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you can find something that's pleasurable, then you'll get on the right track with it.
So you mentioned something, we are all creatures of habit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our habits come from our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so many, and I'm hearing this a lot recently. Maybe it's the pandemic, that we're so into our own heads, but I hear so many people walking around using the words, I can't, I can't change. I can't do this. I can't work. I'm not going to make enough money. And it's like, where did all that change in the last 2 years? Because 2 years ago, even though you may have been living hand to mouth, you were working. Okay. You were doing the things that kept you going. But because you were given this out over the last year and a half, 2 years to maybe, get government assistance, it's now, well, I can't go back to that. How do we get people to see that, you know what, you can't? There are ways of, getting out of your head.
That's interesting. I'm getting ready to do a 4-part series on a new channel on Roku called Careers from Home. And part of that, show development, I'm going to really do a life mastery course, because you really touched on something that kind of like what I was talking about with the pandemic. It makes you go within. And when you hear that self-doubt, or I can't, or, that's one of what is called the 7 saboteur beliefs. And we all go through these. I think it's like a developmental stages that we go through emotionally. And I'm calling this series Success Killers.
I love that.
Because we don't even realize, because we're unaware, that these things are lurking all the time and eating away at our confidence. Not looking at them is what is a success killer. The other thing that you just brought up that I am seeing, that our mind is the number one success killer, because all our mind really, or brain is made for, is to look for danger, to warn us, to understand, to predict what I shouldn't and what I should do, and don't take risk and don't do that. And that's where you can hear from your families, communities, religions, those shouldn't. And when you've kind of got those ingrained in your identity, which we all do, right, I kind of hear people start blaming themselves, and that is not going to help them to get out of it either. So I think this inward journey and understanding some of these self-saboteurs can really help you re-look at this. And what I'm really developing in this 4-part series is that it's in your heart. It's not in your head that you're going to develop and find your purpose or meaning. For maybe why don't you want to go back to that job that is really not providing any kind of purpose or meaning in your life, and you're looking for that now because you did go within, right, during the pandemic. So it's kind of a big question, a big picture. And that's what I'm hoping that people will really look within their hearts now for more of that purpose. And why did I develop this self-doubt or this submissive, I mean, submissive, but dismissive way I look at myself as invisible, powerless, or untrustworthy, or have to be perfect, or, all these, these are some of the seven. And I do think social media has had an impact on all of us. And I think there's more consumption during the pandemic that has not supported our sense of self-worth and that you're good enough, and this comparison. And actually, the latest thing out that Facebook hid for years about Instagram, they've already proven now that women looking at Instagram makes them feel worse about themselves. And I think we have to look at that. What is supporting our way we're looking at ourselves, supporting our worth, our self-esteem? And if something is not supporting that, stop it. Look at that. I call it take a detox for 3 days and see how you feel. Or do you have an absolute obsessiveness or addiction to something that is not good for yourself? And the same thing applies. Look for something healthy to replace it with so that you can move into the zone of success. I call it creating your version of success.
I love that. And, it's interesting about social media. In the beginning, when I first started using Facebook, it was right about the time that I was going through depression. And it would be like, why is everybody so happy? Why do you have the most beautiful children? Why is your house looking so perfect? And I remember sitting down with a friend of mine. This friend would not allow anybody in her house because she said she was a terrible housekeeper. She was embarrassed about it, but she knew what her fault was. So you could sit on her front porch. You couldn't go in her house. I, on the other hand, when I would invite her over, she would say, I'm so embarrassed to come in your house because everything is so neat and clean. And it'd be like, that's just the way I like it in my house. Okay. Right. I'm not going to judge you. But you seem to be judging me, but that's okay. But that's when I realized that what I was seeing on Facebook, just in that conversation, in that situation, nobody's life is better than mine, and mine is not better than theirs. And we all have good things. And we all have some things that aren't so good. And so we have to learn personally how to enjoy the good. And when the not so good is there, try to go around them, try to figure out how can I have fewer of those episodes. And one of my episodes happens to be anxiety. I hate driving on the freeway. I do it. But when I get really, really anxious, a friend of mine gave me a really good way to calm myself down. And he said, look at the license plate in front of you and let that license plate pull you forward. And I realized what my anxiety was is when my eyes saw the horizon, I felt unbalanced. But when I was looking at that license plate, I was focused and I'd be like, oh, where did my anxiety go? It's gone. So there are different tips and tricks. And I'm sure you work through that as well. But once you find it, don't be afraid to share it. It may not work for the next person, but if it does, wow, you've helped one more person.
So beautiful. And, and I think that is the value of your radio show and podcast, is that you are sharing them. You are doing it. And that's exactly why I started mine, because it's like, why are you not sharing this on a broader way? Because gosh, you've done this 30 years. Don't you think you know something at this point that you could share? But, I think it is our insecurities. It is our self-doubts, or, right. Oh, what if somebody says something? Well, get over it. Yep. It's okay. And I really applaud you for doing that. And really, that is one of the things I do like to do best in counseling, is give you one skill. If you can try this right now, let's do that. And let's see if that will help. And I'll give you one right now that is so super simple. And it's based in science, from knowing that we have a vagus nerve that runs all the way from our gut to our brain. And it sends out a calming chemical, acetylcholine, when it's stimulated. And there's this breathing called 4 and 8 breathing, that too. And this was a Nobel Prize winning scientist that found this out. But they found out that there's this 4 and 8 breathing, which means just breathe in 4, counts through your nose, and 8 out through your mouth for 2 minutes. In, to the count of 4 and out to the count of 8. And doing that sends out this calming chemical. And I have had and I have a podcast, I think it's 46, that actually has shown to help with, they call it the key to calmness and wellness, because they've shown that it lowers blood pressure, heart rate, seizures, anxiety, depression, and inflammation. I mean, this list went on and on from a breathing. So when you can find one of those, like you found, that can help you in the moment, keep it, do it, practice it. Don't stop. Don't forget. Just, really keep doing whatever works.
Well, and the point that you brought up about sharing, so many of us, I agree, are so afraid to share because we don't want somebody to look at us cross-eyed and go, that sounds stupid, or I'm never going to do that. And that's how I felt a good portion of my life, growing up and even into adulthood, that just because it worked for me, if I tell you, if I don't have the credentials.
Right. I'm not professional.
Yeah. And so what happened for me is, when my youngest son was graduating high school and getting ready for college, I looked at him and I thought, I have my associate's degree. Nope. I have to go back and I have to get my bachelor's. And I have to get my master's, because my child is not going to jump over me. And it really was my way of proving to myself that I could do it. It wasn't even, that he was going on to college. It really was, I had to prove something to myself. And when I did, it was like, now I can talk about these things. And so in the beginning, I gave myself permission. And after that, it was like, I could have done it 20 years ago without the degrees, because I've lived it.
Yes.
And so many of us don't understand that.
No. And you just explained beautifully one of the 7 saboteur and beliefs. I'm invisible. I'm powerless to do this, unless I have blah, blah, blah. And you overcame that by telling yourself, well, then what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And what are you going to do to feel like you are not powerless? And what would help you to feel good enough or worthy enough to be able to say this? Well, I got to go back and get a degree. If that's what's going to do, that's fine. And that's a big do, though, that you went through to do that. But I also think people can, if they internally look at that and say, you're right, I do feel invisible, or I want to be invisible, I want to stay invisible. What if I don't want to? What do I need to do? And I'll tell you the quick answer: do the opposite to any one of these. Just do the opposite of it and find ways to be visible, to show you are not a victim or powerless. I don't know in your life what you can find that would represent that, but I'll tell you, that's kind of the quick, down, dirty, easy answer to figuring some of these things out.
So tell us again the name of your podcast.
Anxiety Simplified.
So what made you decide? You have a practice, I'm sure are very, very busy. You mentioned a husband, so you've got a family, you've got your dog. Why now add one more thing?
without knowing what a podcast would entail. It just sounded so, enticing. But it was back in the beginning of the pandemic, when I thought I wasn't going to be busy and I thought I was going to have more time. And I saw the need, and I could see that I have been in an office doing just one-on-one work mostly. And I'm like, wait a minute, there is a big need. When I heard that there's a shadow pandemic of mental health issues, tsunami coming our way, it is not going to just be a health issue, it's a mental health issue as well. It just said, all right, attention, you got to do more. You just don't, that's what you do.
Yeah.
This is your thing. Why not get it out on a bigger stage? So that's really why. And since then, I've never been an outgoing kind of extroverted kind of person, more introverted for sure. But it was one of those, get over it. You have a bigger mission here. There's more to this than you and just one client. It is, you need to have a bigger purpose. And this is what it was.
Well, and I love that, because not only do you have that in you, but there are others who are listening. And I want them to know, either be a guest on a podcast or create your own, whatever it is. I mean, even with Facebook Live, I have a number of friends who will, find a nice place where they feel comfortable, and they'll get on and they'll tell their story. And sometimes it's a story that they can't tell you directly, but they're telling this invisible world, okay, this is what I'm going through. Don't judge me. And sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, if I had known earlier, I may have been able to do something for you. But now that I know, you know what? I'm going to be there for you in whatever aspect that is. And so I know the pandemic has caused, and I think it was causing it before. I think that mental health issues have, this 21st century has been a tough one for many of us. Yes. And the changes just continue to escalate. And, I look back and I go, wow, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they just sort of like rolled into each other. Well, we got to those 90s and it was like, oh, beware, year 2000. And then year 2000, beware, it's the 21st century. And it's like, we need to breathe, just like you said.
Yeah, we do. You are so right. Oh, that is beautiful. Oh, and you're so right. And I'd love to share a quote with you that I think sums this up. And it is from Bruce Lee. And I don't know if people know who Bruce Lee was as one of the most famous martial artists in the entire world, and shared things, talk about his version of success. But this is a quote that I think is so apropos for what exactly we're talking about. He said, our lack of self-awareness makes us look to others to tell us who we are. We are what other people say we are. We know ourselves chiefly by hearsay. We have more faith in what we imitate than what we originate. And he had this whole thing, he kind of wrote up a manifesto. I don't know if that's the right word, but he described humans' impulse for conformity and how seductive this illusion that we substitute for self-esteem, and how that becomes who we are because we have the absence of our true self-worth. And I think that is just it. Look within.
It truly is. And when you look within, sometimes it hurts. So I want our listeners to know this right out the gate. You know what? Don't expect it to feel good initially. It might, but I know when I started, I just hated what was coming out, but I knew I had to get it out. And I had to also share it with certain people in my life so that as I started to transform, they would understand. And that's specifically
you warned them.
Right. I mean, if I had not warned my husband, I don't think we would have been able to stay together. But I said to him, you know, for some reason, I don't like what I ever see in the mirror. I said, I can be thin, I can be heavy, I get in my hair right. It didn't make any difference. What I was seeing for years, I didn't like. But when I let that all out, it was like, you know what? Okay, so my hair's not perfect, but I like it. Okay, so my makeup didn't go on as well as I wanted to do today. Okay, tomorrow I'll try better. When I could start doing that, and it was baby steps, it was like, I'm a different person. There were days 10 years ago, I never would have gone out of the house without a full face of makeup. Now, you know what? If you don't like what you see, that's okay.
It's your it's the other person's problem,
exactly,
not yours.
Exactly. And usually I have found that, sometimes I will jokingly say, oh, I can't believe I ran into you. I don't have any makeup on. And people will look at me and go, really? Oh, it's like, oh, so I don't look any different, do I?
That's sweet. You just described a mirror exercise for people just to look in the mirror every day and say nice things to yourself and cancel out and replace the ones that you might be hearing because they may not be so nice. And it's a great place to start. Just exactly what you just said. Yeah, maybe your hair doesn't look the greatest right now, but maybe I'll do something different tomorrow. And you know what? And you're like, okay, I'm accepting. And that's really nice to yourself. That really shows your self-love.
That is. Well, I'm so glad we got to have you on. I'm glad we met through podmatch.com. For those of you listening, Joanne's information will be in the show notes. So there's no excuse not to follow her. Get to her podcast as well. And if you're seeking, assistance, reach out to Joanne, see what she can do for you. It's not a taboo to get help. I think we all need to get help.
Reach out.
I appreciate it. Thank you and have such a beautiful day. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.